All right. Thank you all so much again for joining us today to talk about what to expect from Indonesia as ASEAN Chair in 2023. Apologies again for the delayed start, but it's so good to have you all here with us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are dialing in from today. For me here at the University of Melbourne, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and to all First Nations people on whose land we are discussing today. A friendly reminder that this webinar is a safe space for people to express themselves and their ideas. We would like to invite you to submit questions throughout the webinar, and they'll be answered at the end of the session. Please note, we would most likely not have time to address all questions, but we will make an effort to reach out to individuals afterwards to respond. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the Asialink website following the event to expand the reach of this important conversation. But to ensure that we feel comfortable having an open conversation here today, if you do ask a question that you don't want to be recorded, please let us know, and we will try to edit that out for the public version of the recording. We want to make sure that everyone feels as comfortable and as safe as possible so that we can have honest discussions here at Asialink. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. To begin with, we have His Excellency Dr. Siswo Pramono, who is the Ambassador for the Republic of Indonesia to Australia, having assumed the role in late 2021. He has studied at Airlangga University in Surabaya, as well as at Monash University and the Australia-National University in Australia, and has held a wide range of positions within the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including as Director General of Policy Analysis at the Policy Analysis and Development Agency, as Deputy Chief of Mission in Berlin, and as advisor to the permanent mission for the Organization of Prohibition of Chemical Weapons at The Hague. Shafia F. Muhibat is Deputy Executive Director of Research at the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Indonesia. With CSIS, she has also previously been head of the Department of International Relations and chief editor of their academic publication, Indonesian Quarterly. Shafia has a master's degree from the London School of Economics and a PhD from the University of Hamburg. Clarice Campbell is the lead advisor for skills at the Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement Economic Cooperation Program, or much more simply Katalis, and is also president of the Australia-Indonesia Youth Association. She has previously been director for TAFE at Victoria Southeast Asia as part of Global Victoria, and has studied Indonesian Studies and Linguistics at Monash University, and has studied in Indonesia as both a Hamer Scholar to the University of Indonesia and as part of the Australia-Indonesia Youth Exchange Program. And finally, today's panel will be moderated by Dr. Donald Greenlees, award-winning journalist and author and senior advisor for Asialink. Don has spent more than 20 years working in East and Southeast Asia for a number of major international news outlets and was a political journalist in Canberra beforehand. He has a PhD in International Political and Strategic Studies from the Australian National University and a master's degree in International Relations from Deakin University. So a warm welcome to all of our speakers. Thank you so much for being with us here today. And it gives me great pleasure to hand over to you, Don. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lachlan, and a warm welcome to our audience online and to our three guests, Pak Siswo Pramono, Shafia Muhibat, and Clarice Campbell. The theme of today's discussion is Indonesia's year as chair of ASEAN. Indonesia, not surprisingly, in its chairmanship year, wants to focus on the economic opportunities that ASEAN might bring. It has given the 2023 ASEAN meetings the theme of ASEAN Matters, epicentrum of growth. Now, there are two parts to that theme. In reverse order, it reflects a conviction that ASEAN will be central to the global recovery from COVID, from the post-COVID economic disruption that we're all witnessing, and from geopolitical conflict. But secondly, it implies a certain degree of concern. Indonesia is reminding us or reassuring us that ASEAN does in fact matter. And there are plenty of regional critics of ASEAN's ability to solve regional problems. The national committee that Indonesia set up to oversee the organisation of ASEAN 2023 does acknowledge that there is a need to strengthen ASEAN's institutional effectiveness and capacity against the backdrop of what it's described as multi-dimensional challenges driven by the sharp rise of great power rivalries. That'll be necessary, and it'll be necessary for ASEAN to contribute to avoiding open conflicts and wars. It sees Southeast Asia sitting at the center of those dynamics. To address the challenges, Indonesia is emphasizing the importance of strengthening regional resilience through policies aimed at sustainable development, accelerating growth, particularly by addressing areas like the energy transition, the quality of human capital, attracting investment in high-tech industries. So with that background in mind, our discussion today will start with the question of whether ASEAN does matter and why it matters. I hope we can then focus on the challenge of building ASEAN resilience on issues like how Indonesia and ASEAN rise to the challenge of managing the transformation to green energy, developing the capabilities to embrace new higher value opportunities in the digital and service economies. We will also try to address what role there might be for Australia in ASEAN's future economic growth story. And finally, if we have time, I'd like to address some of the politics of ASEAN 2023, especially for the host, President Joko Widodo, who is due to leave office next year after 10 years in power. But before we get to all of that, there is that question of ASEAN's value as an organisation, with some critics saying it can't unite Southeast Asia to be an effective problem solver. And if we could start with that, Ambassador Siswo, Indonesia feels the need, it seems, to remind us that this year that ASEAN matters. Is there any doubt that ASEAN really does matter? Is ASEAN fit for purpose?
Yes, Don, you mentioned on the need to avoid war in the region, and that's what ASEAN has been doing. 60 years without war, interstate wars in the region, right? After the Vietnam War, we don't have any war in the region, unless some stupid guy is going to make one. Yeah. So, but we managed to have this. And if you look at this analysis from the Lowy Institute on the ASEAN Power Index, one of the power of ASEAN is on the convening powers, and what we have been doing so far. So when we are sitting now as the chair of ASEAN, we are going to continue our commitment when Indonesia sits as the chair of the G20. Yeah, to have everyone on board, promoting more dialogues, and even during the very difficult time last year, the G20 managed to have leader statement. That means everyone agree with the statement, yeah, including the one that need to be continued now on the development of the economics, energy transition, and so on. So ASEAN does matter, yes, and we have proven that it is matters, because there is no war in the region for the last 60 years.
If I read the statement that came out of the National Committee, it seems pretty clear the concern is not about internal wars within ASEAN, it's wars on ASEAN's periphery. And last August, ASEAN foreign ministers issued a statement suggesting there may be even a role for ASEAN to help solve problems like the Taiwan Strait issue, to at least deflate some of those tensions. So clearly ASEAN is very concerned about wars on the periphery that could implicate ASEAN, or certainly damage ASEAN interests.
Yes, that's correct.
A role to play more broadly?
No, my point is this: when we are everyone's in the world at this time suddenly come up with the idea of Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific, blah blah blah, and now we have about 18 or 15 different style of Indo-Pacific, and ASEAN has come up with ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific. This is the alternative that we are proposing to the world. that what we need is partnerships, not rivalries. What we need is more cooperation among countries. And that is what's happening now, right? In the region. Yes, we are worried about the future of the region because of the ferry that you mentioned. There is possible more violence in the ferries, but we would like to give more our way to deal with this. That is the dialogue. This is exactly.
Okay, I get that. But what about the quality of ASEAN's internal processes? And I hear from lots of very experienced commentators that a lot needs to be done to improve the effectiveness of decision making and problem solving within ASEAN. And we've had long-standing calls for reform of ASEAN, perhaps even to address fundamental principles like consensus decision making and the extent of non-interference, particularly when there are cross-border considerations like refugee flows. Is it time for ASEAN to engage in significant reform, internal rule reform?
Yeah, I think you're right. From time to time, we need to sit and to improve, our system. So one of the discussion is, for instance, on how to give more authority or powers to the ASEAN Secretariat, for instance, so that the ASEAN project can be speed up in the decision making and so on. Some already is not yet taken up into the official level, but at the second and 1.5 track, starting 3 years ago, 4 years ago, already some discussion on the reviewing of the ASEAN Charter, for instance. So this is things that we need to learn from time to time and to adjust. But the principle is still the same. ZOFAN, for instance, Zone on Peace, Freedom and Neutrality. This is important because our partner, as far as the trade is concerned, is China. Our partner, as far as the investment is concerned, is the United States, and Europe, European Union. So all contribute on the what becoming ASEAN today as the center of production of manufacturing powers in the world, actually.
But if we could just focus on the rules issue, and there have been plenty of commentators within ASEAN. There was an imminent persons group set up in 2005 that had such illustrious names there as Ali Alatas and Fidel Ramos, Musa Hitam, I think, was on that. And they all said maybe it's time for ASEAN to look at a completely new model where you might have an ASEAN minus approach, where you just bring together the countries that are willing to do something and not take all of ASEAN with you. Is Indonesia ready to make such bold recommendations? I noted from the statement that the National Committee made that there is a desire to strengthen ASEAN's capacity and institutional effectiveness to be able to respond to the challenges of the next 20 years. That sounds pretty fundamental and far-reaching.
Yeah, but we also need to remember, Don, that we already have some. Okay, now what happened after the invasion of Russia to Ukraine? Everyone has the problem of stagflation, except the region. In Indonesia, for instance, our economic growth is pretty much 5.2. Our inflation is still below the economic growth. So that's also happened in many other ASEAN countries. So the point, this is also a proof that actually we are working quite efficiently. But you are right, we need to improve from time to time to speed up decision maker and so on. So I think this already be taken up by all the document that you mentioned, that we are going to move to that direction.
Okay, now if I could bring in Fifi in on this, and Fifi has written that great power competition is the biggest threat to the viability of ASEAN. If I can quote you, you said that ASEAN faces the threat of its global and regional role declining in the coming era of great power competition and of fading relevance to the development and future of its members. In your view, Fifi, how does it avoid that fate?
Thank you, Don. I do believe that, referring back to the theme of the ASEAN Chairmanship, I do believe that the first part of the theme basically represents these basic concerns that the heightening tension among the major powers definitely challenges ASEAN centrality. And there are already plenty of criticisms towards ASEAN concerning its declining role in an era of great power competition, and of course towards its relevance as well. we can use examples of trends of unilateralisms, raising concerns on whether such development would undermine the existing ASEAN-led mechanisms. Where, you know, these are the ASEAN mechanisms is what ASEAN used to display its convening power, the one we spoke about. And in this regard, you know, that there is the danger of, you know, ASEAN being caught in either in the crossfire or being made to choose between the great powers, which is something that ASEAN has fought to avoid for the longest time. So, you know, ASEAN faces the challenge of maintaining mutually beneficial relations with both the powers, even as it continues to uphold ASEAN centrality. But I think this is really the challenge going forward.
And if we look at the consequences of that great power competition, we're seeing alternative structures emerge. Countries are taking out insurance, they're hedging their bets. So we've got groups like the Quad forming. How much of a threat to ASEAN centrality does an organization like the Quad represent, or for that matter, something like AUKUS?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these trends, you know, some call it trends of unilateralism, as I mentioned. You can call it by any other name. But I think the basic issue that there is further and further recognition that, you know, although ASEAN is needed and although ASEAN is recognized through its convening power, but it's losing more and more relevance. So that's why, you know, countries are seeking for other alternatives and creating this either, you know, unilateralism and other groupings, which I think, you know, in a way, countries involved in this groupings would always say that they are not undermining ASEAN, that ASEAN centrality is still important. But I think in reality, they are seeking for alternatives when they see that ASEAN is no longer relevant.
Yes, but can I jump on this?
Yes,
we need to see at the very beginning, Bangkok Declaration. If we look at Bangkok Declaration, what the reason of ASEAN was founded at the times, there are two. Number one, economic development. Number two is social and cultural cooperation. Yeah, this is the very essence of ASEAN. Everyone in ASEAN is a poor, guys. We want to be rich. We want to be economically advanced. This is Bangkok Declaration. And then we have Bali Declaration and so on that follow. Everything is about us, about economic development in the region. We are not designed to either to contain China or to contain America. That's why from the very beginning, if you look at the founding of ASEAN era at the times in the 60s and the 70s, number one, economic development. Number two is more the stability to Zopfan. So at the very beginning, we are very, very much aware that we need to be non-aligned. Yeah, we are not designed for containing everyone. Yeah, and what happened then? What is the proof? Yeah, we have more investment in the region because the company has a smarter intelligence than most government because they put the money on it. Yeah, but why then? Now, if you look at the Economic Intelligence Unit, the data show the most region, the flood of the FDI is ASEAN. Number two is European Union. Number three is Latin America and so on. But ASEAN number one. That means people trust on the stability here.
If I could come to some of these economic questions in a minute, and they're very important, and we will come to them. I just want to pick up on Fifi's earlier theme, and you know, she talked about the threat that other multilateral organisations could pose, and great power competition could pose. There's the two sides of Indonesia's foreign policy tradition are both free and active, and perhaps some people would say the active part has been neglected a bit in the past. In the past, Fifi suggested not so long ago that it was time for Jokowi to be bold, that Indonesia needed a bold initiative this year to seize the agenda. And I think, Fifi, you referred to a three-way partnership. Perhaps you could explain what you mean by that.
Sure. I do need to underline that I'm not suggesting that only Indonesia should be bold, but I think ASEAN as a whole should not be passive in response to growing pressures from both the US and China. It should begin to proactively deflect, you know, such pressures. So it only happens that now that Indonesia is chair, and you know, in this regard, that Indonesia might be able to push for certain initiatives. But I think, ASEAN needs to be more rigid in expressing its interest to work simultaneously with both the US and China to handle this, pressing global and regional challenges. Some of these issues might be the newer issues, pandemics, climate change, global financial crisis, but there has to be a more rigid expression of interest to work simultaneously with both the US and China in handling this global and regional challenges. And I also need to underline that, global and regional challenges of today is completely different to that we had in the 1960s, 1970s when ASEAN was established. And the problem is, and the challenges, maybe I shouldn't say problem, but the challenge is ASEAN has not evolved that much since the 1960s, 1970s. The workings of ASEAN remain the same, while the global and regional challenges have changed tremendously. So this raises the question as, are we relevant to address the current challenges, or are we still trying to address the challenges of the 1970s and the 1960s?
And on that point of relevance, I mean, it struck me that, your proposal was quite ambitious, but interesting. And that is that ASEAN could try to bring the US and China together and try to engender cooperation between the great powers, because you felt that they both quietly wanted that, but didn't want to lose face by pursuing it themselves. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, to be honest, as a scholar, we have to put things out there, things that might not be so realistic. To give you an honest answer, it's ideal. It might not be so realistic, especially if I look at the current condition today, when there is very little initiative moving forward in this regard. But I do think that ASEAN needs to take up this this more rigid initiatives and giving a more clear expression of interest to actually work together with the US and China and bring them together, instead of just waiting on the sidelines and be reactive in whatever goes our way. Whenever there's AUKUS, then we make a comment. Whenever there's a new Quad meeting, then we make a comment. Whenever there's an incident in the South China Sea, then we make a comment. But initiatives like this would show that ASEAN can be proactive. To be honest with you, it might not be so realistic, but I think that's the way to go. Okay, well, just to wrap up this section of the conversation, I'd like to get both Ambassador Siswo and Fifi to give me their thoughts on this. And that is simply, what are the risks of great power competition overshadowing the events this year, particularly the East Asia Summit? Russia, China, the US, they're all members of the East Asia Summit. Jokowi was very anxious during the G20 last year to avoid Ukraine derailing the meeting. How does he handle Ukraine this year and those tensions between the big powers coming to the East Asia Summit, assuming they are all represented at leadership level? How does he avoid the risk? Perhaps I could start with you, Siswo.
Yes, Don. Just like our experience with the G20, how many pressure that we got last year, and then we have been successful to come up with the leader statement, not the chair statement, but leader statement. That means everyone agreed on that. So this time, I'm quite positive that we are able to repeat again the success of the G20 chairmanship into ASEAN chairmanship. Now, on this optimism, so to speak, in ASEAN, it's not like what Mbak Fifi already mentioned. We actually not reactive. If you look at all the projects, if you look at all our partnership with United States, because they are our partner, and with China. As I mentioned, America investment in the region has been increasing, especially in Indonesia, but also other countries. That means they trust the region. They're not going to invest if they don't believe on the region. Number two, we have project, very big one, like this is pretty much controversial, but Australia as a partner, for instance, they have the ASEAN Power Link. Yes, now they are in trouble because of the internal situation, but having sending electricity from northern territories into Singapore is a very big project, and they are not going to do that.
Apologies, Siswo. I mean,
yes.
I do want to cover this in a moment, but the question is very clear. How does Jokowi avoid Ukraine derailing his showcase this year? I mean, you've got Russia, China, US potentially in the same room. Is it going to be a problem for Indonesia to keep harmony around the EAS and other meetings?
Yes, I think we are going to repeat again our strategy for last year, more on the economic cooperation. Then everyone will chip in on the economic cooperation. And last year we end up with a lot of leisure projects that everyone involved on it, on energy, on health, on education. Yeah, everyone have the contribution on that. This is the way, because last year, if you look at the final report of the G20, there are a lot of leisure projects contributed by all of the dialogue partners of ASEAN, but at the time is part of the G20. So we are going to repeat again, more project, more cooperation, more business in the region.
Okay, now Fifi, very quickly in a nutshell, is this a danger? Do you see Russia, China, US coming together at the EAS? Does Ukraine present a problem? Can it be handled?
In a nutshell, I would say no. You know, but always when Indonesia is chair of ASEAN, there is high expectation, and I think this year is even higher because we keep, you know, referring back to the success of the G20, which understandable that there were immediate calls for Indonesia to repeat the success formula at ASEAN too. But I think, but I do think that some of the concerns are valid. But I'm more optimistic, more on the optimistic side that, you know, we won't have any sort of like real quarrels or everything. Yeah.
Got it. Now, Clarice, thank you very much for being so patient while we went through all of that. I want to bring you in, Clarice, to sort of talk. The push and pull of strategic competition is one thing that potentially holds ASEAN back from sort of deeper integration and solidarity. But we're also seeing an absence of, after many, many years of real economic integration. And I was looking at some figures that were produced by ASEAN foreign ministers last year, which show that merchandise trade accounted for just 21% of the total, and services trade was even lower at just under 12%. Only 12% of the region's foreign direct investment came from ASEAN member states. Is ASEAN economic integration failing?
It's a really good question, Don. And I think in response to that, you know, a lot of people have this opinion that ASEAN should work in the same way that the EU does or other economic blocs. And I just don't think that it does, right? You know, we're in a really dynamic region, and there are a lot of different situations that all of the ASEAN member states are sort of dealing with, you know, domestically as well. So I don't necessarily think it's a failure. As Pat Siswo mentioned earlier, you know, ASEAN was formed with these member states who were, you know, they're all developing countries, and we still have a long way to go. So the thing that I take away from, I suppose, the economic integration of these member states is that the situation is actually improving in many of these countries, and especially here in Indonesia. You know, the growth that Indonesia has seen over the last 20 years is, quite frankly, you know, something that Indonesia should be very proud of. And that situation is the same for many other ASEAN member states. So, of course, it would be great to see greater integration and greater trade in between the ASEAN member states, but I think this will sort of improve, and the forecasts are predicting that. But of course, in order for that situation to improve, you know, it's reliant on greater global economic integration and just, you know, increasing the opportunities for trade, not just within ASEAN itself, but, you know, in the wider regions with Australia, with China, with India as well, in order to help ASEAN continue to develop.
But it's been 56 years. I mean, you know, they've had plenty of time to address some of these issues. What do you feel is holding back economic integration with ASEAN? I mean, are there economic mismatches between the economies, or is economic competition as strong an impulse as cooperation amongst ASEAN members, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's always going to be a sense of competition, right? You know, each country has their own particular goods and services that they have expertise in, and, you know, they want to be the winning country, you know, in comparison to their neighbors, right? So there's always going to be that sort of, you know, we want to support our domestic markets before we're sort of supporting our neighbors or, you know, our regional space that we're operating in. And I think especially in Indonesia, that's the case. You know, there are, you know, particular domestic policies that are very supportive of the domestic labor force, for example. But then, you know, it might present a challenge with integrating more within the wider ASEAN region or the wider Indo-Pacific region. So that's always, I think, going to be a feature. And of course, you know, there are pros and cons to these domestic policies, and that will always have to be something that all of the countries in this region are going to have to work through. But, you know, there is a lot of emphasis on how can we engage more with our ASEAN neighbours and in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think that conversation is becoming more and more topical. So, you know, for me, as somebody who works in the Australia-Indonesia relationship, specifically in trade and investment, you know, we're seeing a lot of engagement with, you know, companies who previously weren't looking at, you know, even trading with Malaysia, right? And now they're going, okay, how can we look at Malaysia and Australia and New Zealand and, you know, really think about how can they engage globally. So, you know, there is a bit of a shift going on.
If I could turn to back to Pak Siswo on this, I mean, is there a sense that FDI is a zero-sum game within ASEAN? A factory built by Samsung in Vietnam, you know, is a factory not built in Indonesia. How intense do you see the competition between ASEAN members, and to what extent does that mitigate against real cooperation between them economically?
Yeah, I think you cannot avoid competition among members. It's understandable because most of the leaders are going to take care of their citizens first. Yeah, but there is also an understanding among ASEAN that working together will improve the chance for winning a larger competitive market. So, for instance, let me make an example on the ASEAN Connectivity Project. It's been there for 25 years, and now we are moving toward the master plan of ASEAN connectivity in 2025. What are we going to do? More sustainable infrastructure, working together on that, on digital innovation, working together on that, on seamless logistics. We have been doing this for a long time, but we are going to improve it, regulatory excellence and mobility. Now, people mobility is a lot of examples between Indonesia and Malaysia, for instance. But the point is this, Don. On the economic side, we are getting better. Yeah, let's say Toyota. Yeah, part of the Toyota is made in Philippines, in Thailand, in Indonesia. Become a finished product and we sell it to the global market. Now, for instance, the importation of our Toyota into Australia has been very successful. We start last year. Last year, we planned to import 600 units, and we end up by selling of 900 units. So I mean, that is good that we are competitive, but still, part of Toyota is actually almost a bit from ASEAN members. This is one. Number two, on the good example on the convergence, the economic convergence. Let's say the case of Indonesia and Australia. We have a surplus with the worth of 50 billion. Last year, in a very difficult time, the war in Ukraine, remnant of the COVID, 50 billion surplus with the world. Our 50 billion surplus is sustained by our exportation of steel products, automotive and stuff. The more we sell steel to the world, the more we imported the iron ore from Australia. So this is how the convergence between the two. This is also the case with other ASEAN countries as well.
Well, I want to talk about the role of Australia, and Australia is currently, as I understand it, developing a new economic engagement strategy for Southeast Asia, which may be released in around the budget time. And what role do you see Australia playing in the region's economic development? We signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership in 2021. What do you see as Australia's standing in Asia today?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, I have spoken with Nicholas Moore actually 3 times, and yes, we discussed a lot, especially one example on the public-private partnership.
Nicholas Moore being the Australian envoy to ASEAN appointed by the Prime Minister.
Yes, this is the guy. Yeah, I have spoken with him several times. Also, most of the ASEAN embassy already spoken with him several times. So one of the issue will be on, okay, we have a political risk a little bit. So for instance, if Australia and ASEAN or Indonesia, we have some kind of agreement that the government is going to take care of the political risk and the business can do more on the economic risk. So there's some kind of mechanism that we can work together on that, minimizing the risk. Yeah, so a lot of innovation that we can do together, but actually, again, Don, last year was very difficult. Yeah, but despite of difficulties we faced last year, the war in Ukraine, stagflation, and COVID, total trade between Indonesia and Australia improved by 7%, not bad. And Australia investment to Indonesia last year is increasing by 270%. This is big number from the very low basis, but at least you jump from number 16 into number 11.
Well, that's a good point for me to put a question to everybody, and I'd like to get Fifi and Clarice to come in on this. And I just want to get everyone's thoughts quickly. There is a view that Australia enjoyed greater status in Southeast Asia 2 or 3 decades back. I've heard some critics make that point. How do you see Australia's standing and relevance for the region's future? And perhaps I could start with you, Clarice.
Yeah, I think the reference that, Australia had a bit of a greater standing in the region, 30 years ago, probably links just to the, I suppose, linguistic abilities of certain Australians to engage with the region. And I think particularly in the Indonesian case, we've got a lot less, younger Australians who have the ability to engage with Indonesia, for example, because they're just not undertaking Indonesian language studies. I think this is very well documented, and the numbers of Australian students studying Indonesian language, not just at the school level, high school and primary school, but also at the university level, has seen a really steep decline. And that will impact, Australia's ability to engage with the region. And this is not just the case for Indonesia either, it's also happening with other ASEAN member states. So that needs to be addressed because without the ability for Australians to speak the neighbour's language, business becomes quite difficult. So, for example, I work obviously in the Australia-Indonesia relationship, and there's only a couple of us who are, based in Jakarta and have, bilingual language abilities, and that's really concerning. So that's something that Australia needs to tackle internally and really, invest in and consider how can we change this, not just with Indonesia, but also, with.
But it runs deeper than the language, and I think there's an issue there around sort of policies on engagement, across the board. Fifi, what's your sense of all of that?
Absolutely agree with both of you. Definitely. I mean, it's not really about questioning Australia relevance, but rethinking the whole relations between Australia and the neighbors and how the neighbors perceive Australia. And I think this lack of understanding is really playing a great deal in terms of how we view each other. And I do think that a lot of more work should be put into this. I mean, we hear all the time that, good bilateral relations, but there are always potentials for, improvement, business, cultural activities, education, and so on. But I do think that, improving the lack of understanding among Australia and its neighbors is very important.
A word I hear across the region often when talking about bilateral relations is trust. And of course, particularly in relation to Indonesia, we've had our ups and downs. We've had East Timor, the Snowden affair, and most recently execution of Bali 9. How do you see us, our current standing in Indonesian perceptions? Is there trust there?
To me?
Yes. Fifi,
oh, okay. No, sure. I mean, lack of understanding, meaning that it's important. It's difficult to build trust, right? It's again, of course, a language issue is a problem, but I think the issue of building trust, I think, takes a lot more should take a lot more effort in terms of the bilateral relations. And some of the issues that you mentioned, I think the deeper problem is that the lack of elaboration on what the issues are actually about and what implications they have on the bilateral relations. And this lack of elaboration and explanation creates this, lack of understanding, and then again, the mistrust.
Okay, now, Ambassador Siswo, if I could come back to you, I know you're very keen to talk about some of the substantive areas for cooperation, particularly around energy and other areas. If we could just take, first of all, a look at the renewable energy. This is an area where Australia has some very big ambitions. What is Indonesia's green energy transition pathway looking like, and what sort of role can Australia play in that process?
Yeah, so I think both Indonesia and Australia and the whole region is moving toward more renewable energy and more green energy. For Indonesia, it's very important for us to have more green energy and to produce green products. And that's precisely the nature of the relation between Indonesia and Australia. You have technology, you have labor, yeah, and then we need more vocational training from your side, education, to have also a green labor. It's important. Now, one of the projects that I can give an example because time is very limited. Number one, for instance, we are developing with Australia the so-called the largest, perhaps, the carbon capture storage. This will be built in Arun, for instance. The agreement between the two is already signed. So this is the capacity again to absorb the emissions, yeah, channel it into critical liquid into Arun, yeah, and the size is so big, like 1 billion ton to host so speak carbon, yeah. So they are now in the first stage of development, what you call it, feasibility study, but Australia already invested about 11 million US dollar. Next year we come to the decision whether we go or not go with this project. That means this is one example on how a green project has been carried out with the country. Number two is on electric vehicle. Yeah, so this is the very important point. If you look at the data, the only region with the increasing number of the car users is only Asia and Australia. And Australia has no car industry, so that depends on our car. So, for instance, Indonesia has been projected to use 50 million, yeah, 50 million car electric vehicle by 2030. 1.15 million. That's a lot. 30 million is for motorbike, electric motorbike. 2 million is for cars, yeah. And the lithium should be coming from Australia because we don't have lithium. The way to do it is that either we invest in the lithium mining in Australia, and then Australia invests in the lithium processing in Indonesia, because if you process it in Australia, it will be very, very expensive. And the battery is 30% of the value of the car. So if the battery is not competitive, the car is not competitive. So the point is that we work together, lithium from your side, processing in Indonesia, market will be either Indonesia, Australia, or the rest of the world. This is a good point for the transition of energy in the real term.
I gather President Jokowi asked Prime Minister Albanese to sell Australian lithium to Indonesia during the G20. Have we got any commitments on that side? Is Australia going to be selling lithium to Indonesia?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot. Because I just came back.
You've done the deal?
I just came back from the battery conference as one speaker there. So some of the deal is not yet now, but there is an MOU between Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and the Western Australian the authority on this on the what's call it strategic mineral, including lithium. Number one. Number two, there is a lot of expectation from the company, because I have spoken with many companies and from Western Australia, inviting more investment of Indonesia into their company, and then Indonesia is going to be the off-taker of the lithium from Australia. I think the deal is coming.
Okay, well, this is a very, very rich area for discussion, and one we could go on with for a while. I'd love to have a further conversation about this with you, but in the interest of time, I just want to move on to another area that you have set as a priority, and that's education and training, and the opportunities for Australia and Indonesia to more closely collaborate on that. There's talk about more Australian university campuses setting up in Indonesia, and also technical vocational training centres being set up. So where is the opportunity there?
Is it me?
Yes, again, sorry.
Okay, yeah. We learned from the history of Vietnam, Don, because RMIT opened campus in Vietnam 20 years ago. And now and most of the subject offered by MIT is on STEM, science, technology, and then engineering and math. And what happened today? Vietnam is among the strongest country in ASEAN for manufacturing powers. We would like to have this not only in Indonesia, but all over Asia. Okay, we have Monash already in Indonesia, and there are 2 other universities in the pipeline establishing campus to Indonesia, but I cannot mention the name now because they are in the process of doing business of establishing the new campus. So my point is that more education that will be good for Australia because we can provide you with skilled labor. Vocational training is also the case that we have been doing a lot of projects together on improving vocational training. But the other part is also important is mutual recognition agreement on professionals, yeah, engineers, nurse, doctors, and so on. Yeah, so I think this is the things that we were going to build together. Health is very important, and we are very happy with the level of investment, Australian investment on the health in Indonesia. Like for instance, Aspen Medical, they are committed to develop 23 hospitals in Indonesia and 2 actually moving toward the groundbreaking now, and also 650 clinics. They are going to produce nurse, and I expect, and I propose nurse working in Australian hospital can also have the qualification to work in Australia as well. So I think this is the good point for the relation between the 2 countries.
Now, this is an area of expertise that you have, Clarice, and you've done a lot of work on this over a long time, particularly on vocational and technical training. How big do you see the opportunity for Australia in this space in Indonesia, but more broadly in ASEAN? And how urgent is the need, in your view, for the region to get access to this sort of these educational opportunities?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say the opportunity is quite large. There tends to be a lot of focus on, how can an Australian university establish a campus, whether it's in Indonesia or another ASEAN member state. And of course, that level of education, the sort of bachelor's, master's degree, PhD program level of qualification is certainly important for, ASEAN to have, right? However, I see the opportunity lying more so in the vocational space. At the moment, for example, in Indonesia, majority of the Indonesian population, more than 60% of the Indonesian population, don't even have high school level qualifications. Now, that group of people are not going to be studying at Monash University. But, in their working life, they probably will need to learn some sort of vocational trade. They will need some upskilling opportunities in their workplace to be able to have the skills to be competitive in the market. So I see there being a lot of opportunity to work in that sort of workforce upskilling area. And that actually means working very closely with companies themselves rather than education institutions in Indonesia to undertake that upskilling. It's a lot of the expectation is very high for, the average company in Indonesia to say, okay, I'm going to send my staff to undertake a vocational course of some kind for the next 6 months. It takes them out of the workforce, or there's a sort of, expectation that they're spending a lot of time to do that course. However, if you embed that into the workplace culture and there are opportunities for upskilling and training within the workplace itself, that could kind of revolutionize the opportunities for those domestic workers. So actually, there are a lot of opportunities for Australian vocational providers or other skills providers to be working with these Indonesian companies, and that applies across the ASEAN region too.
This is also not just about individuals, it's about whole economies. I mean, if you don't have that skilled workforce, you're going to miss the opportunities of the 4th industrial revolution potentially, or not extract full benefit from them. And there are bigger picture issues like escaping the middle income trap. And I've seen World Bank and ADB reports on this, that unless there is an urgent program to address these skills gaps, a lot of Southeast Asian countries could get left behind. Is that a serious risk?
Look, I think it is a risk, but, there just needs to be really serious investment in this space. And, it needs to be taken very seriously, not just at the, relying on individuals to go, oh, do I need to do another qualification in order for me to get my promotion? Workplaces themselves need to recognize, okay, we have a significantly large workforce, they don't seem to have the skills that are meeting the requirements of the sector that we're working in. Let's invest in their skills and let's get them to undertake, whatever courses they are. So I think that really just needs to be, an area of focus for these companies who are sort of recognizing that, everybody says they have skills gaps. So invest in it and actually do something about, ensuring that their employees don't have those skills gaps.
All right. Now, look, we're running out of time, and I've still got a pile of questions here I would have loved to have asked. Just one final thing, I suppose, to wrap things up. I wanted to come back to Fifi, and I wanted to get a sense of how important this year's ASEAN is for President Widodo. He is supposed to leave office next year. This may be his last big global opportunity. What do you see as Widodo's foreign policy legacy after 10 years in power? It was often said that he was wary of multilateral forums at the start of his presidency. Has he grown into that?
I think it would be unfair to say things like, ASEAN is not important and so on. But I do think there's a different degree of importance put in different multilateral forums for the president himself, personally for him. But I do think for Indonesia, for the government as a whole, ASEAN is important. It's still, the cornerstone of Indonesia's foreign policy and so on. And it's still very much relevant to how Indonesia projects itself in international relations. So that I would like to underline. But I do think that, in an election year like this, this year, preparing for the election and next year, foreign policy does take up a little bit lower in the priorities for the public eye, at least. So whatever things that's lower in the priorities of the public eye would be also lower in the priority of the politicians in an election year like this year and next year, So I guess in a way, you can already sense the euphoria of G20 was different to what we have now in ASEAN. There's much less euphoria in terms of the public eye, not simply looking at it from the government point of view, but from the public. And you can tell that, last year's G20 was more of a big event that everybody felt that they were somewhat connected to it. With ASEAN, it's a little bit different, and the concern is that when it's lower in the priority of the public, it would be lower in the priority of the government as well in an election year like this.
Okay, look, thank you all. We haven't left much time for Q&A. I'm sorry, we tried to get through probably way too much, but I will try to address some questions that have been coming in here. Lachlan, do you want to do this, or are you happy for me to go through the questions here?
I'm happy for you to have a look.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've had a look. So what we've got here is a first question. If avoiding war has been successful, how do you reconcile that with what is happening in Myanmar? And I'm guessing that's directed particularly at you, Ambassador Siswo.
Yes. What I'm talking about is actually interstate war, but we in ASEAN from time to time we have domestic conflict and so on. So on Myanmar, I think the first one, it is the Myanmaris that should deal with the issue, because we cannot impose things on the independent country like that. But ASEAN is going to create an enabling environment for people in Myanmar to have a reconciliation or solution among themselves. So I think this is the direction.
Okay, another good question here is, a united and neutral ASEAN is better for Australia than a divided ASEAN? I think we'd all agree with that. How can Australia counter China's influence in ASEAN without creating internal divisions? And perhaps I can put that one over to you, Fifi.
Well, I don't think even ASEAN can counter China's influence in ASEAN, let alone another an external party. But it is a big challenge. That's what I can say. There is already internal divisions among the ASEAN member countries. Some are closer to the US, some are closer to China. Some are trying their best to remain neutral, like Indonesia. And whether we like it or not, it is creating internal divisions. And I think that's a challenge that ASEAN needs to tackle moving forward.
Okay, there's another key question here, and I'll just sort of throw it out to everybody to see who's a taker. But ASEAN cooperation on climate change mitigation. Is there much cooperation within ASEAN on these issues? How well is it being coordinated, and what role is there for multilateral development bank funding and external support for helping ASEAN achieve those targets? Any takers on that?
Yes, actually, this is our project, yeah, under Indonesian chairmanship. Just remember that we are going to have a very big event, ASEAN Business and Investment Summit and ASEAN Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum. And that means not only about projects, but about also financing. Yeah, this is the things that we are going to pursue together. Yeah, including on the sustainable infrastructure. This will be the focus. And just to let you know, Don, we are going to have a very big roadshow in Australia, in Canberra, Sydney, Melbourne, Hobart, Adelaide, and Perth, just to promote the participation of Australia into this ASEAN Business Investment Summit and also ASEAN Indo-Pacific Infrastructure Forum.
Okay, now there's another. Please go ahead.
I'll just quickly add to that essentially all of Australia's sort of development programs sort of in the region will start to have a bit more of a focus on, you know, sustainability and climate change and renewable energy and those sorts of topics. So, you know, over the next couple of years, I think you'll start to see a few more initiatives that are sort of focusing on this area for the region.
Right. And now another good question is Timor-Leste applying to join ASEAN. What are the prospects of that happening during Indonesia's chairmanship year? It looks like Indonesia wants to give it a bit of a push along. Perhaps I could start with you on that one, Fifi, and maybe Ambassador Siswo might give us his thoughts as well.
Well, I don't have any insider's insight on this, but you're absolutely right. I mean, Indonesia has been pushing for this for quite some years now. But to be realistic, there are some pushback from some of the other member countries who might want to slow down the process a little bit. I'm not quite sure how it's going to turn out this year, but I'm kind of on the pessimistic side.
Siswo?
Yes, there is already some progress from last year when ASEAN leaders already agreed that Timor-Leste will be included in some of the ASEAN activities. This is already in the leader statement, and we are going to do our best now to push more.
Terrific. All right, everyone. Look, my apologies for having to sort of race through a crowded agenda. There was a lot more we could discuss, but I think we gave our audience a good flavour of what to expect from ASEAN 2023 in Indonesia. Apologies to those people who submitted questions we didn't get to, but we're just a tad over time, and we'll try to stick to time. So thank you very much. Any final words from you, Lachlan?
Yeah, I think that was just an incredibly interesting session, and you can hear just how much there is left to speak about. If only we had several days and not just 1 hour, but just an enormous thank you to all of our panelists for being here, sharing their incredible insights. And obviously we here at Asialink are going to be doing a lot more work on ASEAN and Indonesia, as we always have been doing. And it's an enormous relationship, an enormous region, so dynamic, always changing. So just we'll be keeping our ear to the ground and sharing more insights with you. Thank you all so much for being here. We look forward to hearing everything that happens over this year, and best of wishes and happy Easter. Enjoy the long weekend for all those who get to enjoy it. Thank you all.
Thank you. If our speakers want to remain online for a moment, we might continue briefly.